So onboarding at Ontario Shores with a virtual placement was something that Mare and I had to get very creative with. We had a limited amount of clinical time together, so we really focused on giving a brief introduction around what the unit was all about, the modalities that we use, the role of social workers on the unit, along with some of the day-to-day expectations that a social worker would normally engage in. The part that we spent a lot of time focusing on was some of the modalities that were available and some of the clinical experiences that were available for Mare and I to work closely together on. So we had outlined all the different types of modalities and different learning experiences, and then matched that with her clinical goals to see how we could best use her clinical time, and then also find ways for her to get experience with more of the institutional non-clinical practice outside of the clinical time that we had together.
Yeah, so like Morgan said, we did spend a little bit of time, especially in the beginning, her introducing me to the unit, her work, the therapeutic modalities that she uses, and she sent me a lot of resources on the specific interventions she uses. So from there, I was able to do a bit of my own research, find out what these interventions were like, do my own research on how they are used within the specific population. And I also did a bit of my own research on the population that we were working with. So I had never worked with people or adolescents experiencing eating disorders before. So I looked up within some informal resources. So I looked up some podcasts, I looked up some documentaries that gave me a little taste into what this experience, specifically what an inpatient eating disorder unit, what being in that environment could be like. And I felt that that was hugely instrumental also in my learning to get a bit of a taste of what everyday life on this unit was like. We met on a phone call. We had a little phone call where we were able to introduce ourselves. She introduced the type of work that she does. I kind of introduced the kind of work that I had done thus far with my previous practicum and what I had focused on. And from there, we spent like, I would say about an hour getting on the same page about how we were going to move forward. And something that she kept saying was, how can I best support you during this practicum? And being able to work with a supervisor who was so immediately supportive during a time where so much was changing for me as a student made me feel so comfortable and made me feel like I could really dive into the learning that I was going to do with Morgan. So of course there was lots of anxieties around what was happening and the changes, but being able to be supervised by someone who could acknowledge that and say, I'm here for you, let's move forward, it made this whole transition so much easier.
Prior to the pandemic, I had very minimal experience working remotely and doing any type of therapy. So it was definitely new territory for me as well. And doing e-supervision had never happened for me before. I'm used to doing supervision in person. So that was also, I felt very anxious and nervous kind of going into it and was excited to kind of see where it went. So I found that being able to build a schedule and build a structure to kind of keep us on track and keep us rounded in the midst of all that was changing and all the chaos and all of the stress that's happening for a student or for a placement field instructor was key, I think, for us to be able to really focus on what we wanted to do and to make the practicum as meaningful as possible for both of us together, because we were both kind of learning and swimming and exploring together for the first time. So I found that was really helpful. And in terms of doing e-counseling or running e-groups was the experience that I had, and Mariana and I had it quite a few times been able to talk about it, was that the patients and the adolescents were actually so much more engaged through a lot of the e-counseling and the e-groups that we were running. And that the kids really were able to come together and absorb the information in a much more effective and productive way than what we have seen previously in person. So that was a really interesting learning, and I'm not sure if that was partly because we were so structured with the way that we were offering treatment, or if it was just the kids' way of really appreciating what was happening. But it was definitely interesting to see the benefits that came out of e-learning and e-counseling.
Of course, yeah, I can definitely speak to some of the surprises. I think Morgan and I constantly talked about this during supervision. So I have very little experience prior to this running any sort of therapeutic group. So diving into groups was, even if it was going to be in person, was already going to be a challenge. And then diving into an e-group was a further challenge. And I think I chose to meet it with some excitement. Like, let's just see where this goes. And I think because Morgan also had a little bit of that feeling, like it was so much easier to really lean into that. And I was really, I think, really surprised by the amount of clinical skills that I was able to use and practice within an e format. So something that I thought was not going to work, I was like, there's no way I will be able to read body language via Zoom or via the computer. Like, I think that element will be lost. And I actually found that it was not at all. And I could really pick up on the cues that some of these kids that we were working with were giving us. And also, it was interesting to see them engage with the material through an online format. There were some things that I think really worked within the online format. Like, we played some games through a mindfulness activity that we were using, and I was very anxious. I didn't know how it was going to work, and the kids were still completely engaged and still participating. So I think that was a little surprising to me. I didn't know how engagement was going to work. I didn't know how I was going to be able to build a therapeutic rapport with some of these kids, and was very pleasantly surprised by the ability to do so, and the ability to still pick up on interest and still pick up on body language. That was all still very accessible through this format. So that was a surprise and a wonderful one. I think for me, it really gave me some encouragement to keep going with the groups and keep improving them, and yeah, made them all very exciting to attend and be a part of.
Some of the techniques and some of the strategies that worked really well for us to enhance e-learning and e-supervision was really finding ways to do experiential learning. So in absence of being able to be on the floor and really get that full experience, we did a lot of experiential learning in supervision. So we would talk about the kids and what their clinical formulations were, and we would actually do role plays in supervision, where either I would act as one of the kids, or Mare would act as one of the kids, and we would practice some of the interventions that we were using. So specifically, we focused a lot on emotion-focused family therapy, and just within that therapy allows for so much experiential learning. And I really found that as a supervisor, I pulled from the ways in which I support parents or teach parents or my other colleagues how to practice and learn skills, whether it's DBT skills or RODBT or emotion coaching skills, and being able to facilitate that type of environment or simulation through e-supervision was really, really helpful for us. So I had her join virtually some meal support trainings that I was running, which I also think was really helpful, because she was able to, again, experience that more in person, in the moment, hearing other people's perspectives and being able to practice what scenarios really look like in real time. So that was definitely a huge strategy that we used. Another big one was kind of just like diving right into the work and being able to explain what the anxieties were and why they were there, and being able to make a conscious decision to push through that. So Mare and I had lots of conversations about how she could start facilitating groups and the anxiety that came along with that, and being able to build rapport and things like that, which is normally really difficult for placement students to start building that rapport. Kids seem to be a little bit apprehensive at first. Between the like kind of experiential learning and being able to push through the anxiety through a supervision standpoint, and also being able to set really clear clinical goals for her to meet, was really, really helpful to make this meaningful for herself and also for the population that we serve.
I would do this practicum again and again and again. Like, I really had such a positive experience learning even through this e-learning format. And I think some key takeaways that I have that are really important for students to know is I think Morgan touched on this a little before, but having a structure and outlining clear goals for yourself and then sharing those with your supervisor are really essential. Having a structure, giving yourself some time to self-care, being flexible and open, and ultimately just diving into the learning. Like, there are so many opportunities, and like Morgan said, I really had to push through those anxieties, which Morgan really helped with, dive into the learning, and I had the best experience. So I feel very grateful, and this has really pushed my own skills in a way that I could not have foreseen prior to this practicum.
For me, as some of the takeaways were really utilizing all of these resources that we all hold on to so tightly, and being able to share resources with my students. And I would absolutely do this again. I found it to be really, really helpful for me. And I recommend that any placement supervisor who is thinking about doing e-supervision or e-learning really, really jumps into it, because there are so many great benefits to doing it this way that I would never have anticipated, and really brought out a lot of strong clinical skills in me that I think sometimes get lost in the busyness of in-person supervision and in-person support, and really being able to carve out some time to get back to the basics and really focus on the clinical work and the learning. So that was wonderful for me, and it was wonderful to have a placement student that was equally as excited and eager to learn.